Vatican Assassins, Chapter 33, The Jesuits, 1880 to 1915, Making America Dominantly Catholic, Massive Immigration, Birth of a Nation, Masonic White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, General Sherman's son, the Jesuit, the Sicilian Mafia, controlling the Pope's organized crime syndicate, the Fourth Degree, Knights of Columbus, Jesuit Henchmen of War, Assassination of Jose Rizal, National Hero of the Philippines. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose, an evil soul producing holy witness. It's like a villain with a smiling cheek, a goodly apple, rotten at the heart. Oh, what a goodly outside falsehood hath. In 1900, Rome will take this country and keep it. Priest Isaac Hacker, 1888. To write the history of Jesuitism is to give in detail the record of sanctified scoundrelism, as with the face of the saint and the heart of a devil it has lived and wrought in this world, to do its worst against biblical Christianity, brotherly love, manhood and righteousness. Washington, D.C. is in the lap of Rome. The Jesuits ruling Washington may dispense with all laws, human and divine, dissolve all oaths and vows, and free men in the cabinet of the president from the obligations which bind other men. The Jesuit University, Catholic University of America, is built in Washington as Conspiracy Hall, in hopes that liberty may be throttled in its stronghold. There in Washington is that Jesuit organization which has set out to control this country, which has been repudiated by every free country, Catholic and Protestant, in the old world. They have come to our borders. They are among us today and to stay, and they understand that they are to secure the control of this continent by destroying the public school system of America. Justin D. Fulton, 1888. In pagan times, the great opposition to biblical Christianity was carried on by the secret societies of the initiated, who at first tried to stamp out the new religion by persecution, and then more successfully to corrupt it by foisting themselves among its teachers and counselors. A striking parallel is found in the secret society of the Jesuits. That indefatigable order which undoubtedly saved the Romish Church from destruction at the period of the Reformation, and has ever since proved the chief state and strength of the system of disguised paganism which we have been endeavoring to expose. But energetic as its members showed themselves to be in times that are past, it is probable that they were never more so than in the last few years. To their exertions we may refer the fact that the tide of popery is again setting in upon the Protestant countries of England, America, and Germany. With that patient persistence which would be likely to characterize highly educated men trained to regard the individual efforts as a mere contribution to the action of a vast and skillfully directed organization engaged in carrying out a plan, a global conspiracy, which will avowedly require many years for its accomplishment. The Jesuits have worked on. They have gradually secured a great influence over the press via the CFR in America. They have become clergymen and ministers of various denominations, and whenever in such positions it did not seem advisable to infuse their own tenets into their teaching, they have been content to be orthodox for the sole purpose of spreading that doctrine of tolerance and Christian charity which is ever upon their lips, as was done in Prince Bismarck's Protestant Second Reich, until they have accumulated sufficient power to enforce obedience to their own iron tyranny, as was done in Hitler's pro-Roman Catholic Nazi Third Reich. For they ever recognize the fact that it is as important for their object to attenuate Protestant feeling and to enfeeble Protestant organization as it is to propagate their own views. Nor it is to be feared are they unmindful of that rule of their order which directs them to spread revolutionary sentiments and to encourage sedition and anarchy in those countries in which the supremacy of the Pope is not recognized. Hitherto, the British Empire has been their great obstacle, but the result of their labors may now be seen in every part of it, both at home and in the colonies and dependencies. Moran Brock, 1883. Yes, San Francisco, the rich, the great queen of the Pacific, is in the hands of the Jesuits. The very first day of the discovery of the gold mines of California, the Jesuits had the hopes of becoming masters of those inexhaustible treasures and they secretly laid their plans with the most profound ability and success. They saw at once that the great majority of the lucky miners of every creed and nation were going home as soon as they had enough to secure an honorable competence to their families. It became evident that of those multitudes which the thirst of gold had brought from every corner of the world, not 1 out of 50 would fix their homes in San Francisco. The Jesuits saw at a glance that if they could persuade the Irish Catholics, George Hearst, father of the baptized Roman Catholic and media mogul William Randolph Hearst, to settle and remain there, they would soon be the masters and rulers of that golden city whose future is so bright and so great. And that scheme, worked day and night with the utmost perseverance, has been crowned with perfect success. The Irish Big Four, known as the Silver Kings of the Comstock Lore, being William S. O'Brien, James G. Fair, John W. Mackay, and James C. Flood, who willed his gorgeous mansion in Menlo Park, California, to the Jesuits' Order of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The consequence is that while you find only a few Americans, Germans, Scotch, and English millionaires in San Francisco, you find more than 50 Catholic Irish millionaires in that city. Its richest bank, Nevada Bank, is in their hands, and so are all street railways. The principal offices of the city are filled with Irish Roman Catholics. Almost all of the police are composed of the same class, as well as the volunteer military associations. Their compact unity in the hands of the Jesuits, with their enormous wealth, make them almost supreme masters of the mines of California and Nevada. The largest bank now servicing California and Nevada being the Jesuit Order's pro-Latin alien invasion CFR affiliate Bank of America. When one knows the absolute abject submission of the Irish Roman Catholics, rich or poor, to their priests, how the mind, the soul, the will, the conscience are firmly and irrevocably tied to the feet of their priests, you can easily understand that the Jesuits of the United States form one of the richest and most powerful corporations the world ever saw. It is well known that those 50 Catholic millionaires with their myriads of employees are, through their wives and by themselves, continually at the feet of the Jesuits who swim in the Golden Sea. No one, if he be not a Roman Catholic or one of those so-called Protestants who give their daughters to the nuns, as did the Masonic President Andrew Johnson, and their sons to the Jesuits to be educated, as did the cold-blooded killer Federal General William T. Sherman, has much hope where the Jesuits rule of having a lucrative office in the United States today. Charles Chiniquy, 1886. In the encyclical letter of the Jesuit-trained Pope Leo XVIII, written by Jesuits to American Catholics, November 1st, 1885, he says, "We exhort all Catholics who would devote careful attention to public matters, to take an active part in all municipal affairs and elections, and to favor the principles of the Church in all public services, meetings, and gatherings. All Catholics must make themselves felt as active elements in daily political life in the countries where they live. They must penetrate, wherever possible, in the administration of civil affairs, must constantly exert the utmost vigilance and energy to prevent the usage of Protestant constitutional liberty from going beyond the limits of God's, the Pope's fixed laws, as made known by canon law and papal decrees. All Catholics should do all in their power to cause the constitutions of states and legislation to be modeled in the principles of the true Church, the 14th Amendment serving that purpose. All Catholic writers and journalists, now controlled by the Order's New York Council on Foreign Relations, should never lose for an instant from view the above prescriptions. It is not lawful to follow one rule in private conduct and another in a government or state, to wit, that the authority of the Church should be observed in private life but rejected in state matters. The Roman Church has a right to exercise its authority without any limits set to it by the civil powers. The Pope and the priests ought to have dominion over temporal affairs. The Roman Church and her ecclesiastics have a right to immunity from civil law. In case of conflict between ecclesiastical and civil powers, the ecclesiastical powers ought to prevail. The Pope can dispense with any law, including the Constitution of the United States. The constitutions and decrees of the popes are explanations of the divine law and are therefore binding as soon as known. The Church does not recognize the right in the government to say whether or not the pontifical decree shall be enforced. President George W. Bush admittedly seeking to implement the policies of Pope John Paul II. She is supreme and independent and therefore can admit of no intermeddling, namely constitutional limitations with her authority, temporal power. Peter Dan's theology. Shortly after the decree of infallibility was announced and this profession of primary fidelity to the Pope was made in New York, the New York Herald, which has always been controlled by moderate Roman Catholics, said, "There are thousands of accursed liberal Roman Catholics in this land who do not place Rome above the United States and whose patriotism cannot be subverted by fealty to religious dogmas and creeds." To this patriotic utterance, which we would fain believe to be true, the New York Tablet Roman Catholic of November 1872 replied, "The Herald is behind the times and appears not yet to have learnt that the thousands of Catholics it speaks of are simply no Catholics at all, if it does not misrepresent them." Wow! Galatianism, which denies the temporal power of the Pope, is a heresy, and he who denies the papal supremacy in the government of the Universal Church, as did President John F. Kennedy, is as far from being a Catholic as he who denies the incarnation of the real presence, which doctrinal position condemns to death about 90% of American Roman Catholics who, after being forcefully amalgamated with blacks for over 50 years, will be sacrificed during the Pope's present Anglo-American-led crusade against Islam, butchered during the common inner-city race war, and annihilated with the orders coming Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion, the most devoted Roman Catholic Northeast and Quebec quite possibly being spared much of the bloodbath. The Church is more important than country, and loyalty to creed that God teaches and enjoins through her is more important than patriotism. We must obey God, the Pope, rather than man. Our Church is God's Church and not accountable either to state or the country. Thus, you see how the organ of the hierarchy denounces the doctrine of moderate Romanism, which had only insisted on loyalty to the country, as did Italy's King Victor Emmanuel II, who, enforcing such a heresy, was assassinated, as was our patriotic President John F. Kennedy. Nationality must be subordinate to religion, and we must learn that we are Catholics first and citizens next. God is above man and the Church is above the state. Bishop Gilmore. The Catholics of the United States are strongly devoted to the sustenance and maintenance of the temporal power of the Holy Father as Catholics in any part of the world. And if it should be necessary to prove it by their acts, they are ready to do so. Cardinal McCluskey. If the American Republic is to be sustained at all, it must be by the rejection of the principles of the Reformation, banning the Reformation AV 1611 Bible from the public schools via the Masonic Supreme Court, destroying the middle class and ending true elections, elimination of individual apportion, taxes, and hard money, elimination of national patriotism, abandoning military isolationism, fighting foreign crusades for the papacy, eliminating the white race, etc., and the acceptance of the Catholic principles, socialism, communism, fascism, socialist democracy, anti-Torah Zionism, Jesuit supremacy of the state over the individual, free trade, progressive income tax, central bank and property tax, inheritance tax, driver's license, hunting license, marriage license, common law rights reduced to privileges, etc. If allegiance to the Church demand of us opposition to political principles adopted by civil government, we should not hesitate to obey the Church. While the state has rights, she has them only in virtue and by permission of supreme authority, and that authority can only be expressed through the Church. We are purely and simply Catholic and profess unreserved allegiance to the Church, which takes precedence off and gives the rule to our allegiance to the state. which gives rise to the question as to why European and Latin Roman Catholics immigrated to a white Protestant country in the first place. There's only one answer: to subtly destroy it for the greater glory of God. This agitation is the Roman question, not the Jewish question. Catholic world, how can this independence of civil authority of the Pope be secured? Only in one way: the Pope must be a sovereign himself, no temporal prince. Whether emperor, a king, or president, or any legislative body can have any lawful jurisdiction over the Pope. What right has the Pope to be independent of every civil ruler? He has it in virtue of his dignity as the vicar of Christ. Christ himself is King of Kings, but the Pope governs the church in the name of Christ and as his representative. His divine office therefore makes him superior to every political, temporal, and human government. Pope's temporal power, number 46. One of the most capable and learned writers in the Roman Catholic Church is Jesuit temporal coadjutor Dr. O.A. Brownson of the Catholic Review. Among his writings, we extract the following: all the rights the sects have or can have are derived from the state and rest on expediency, which maxim is the foundation of Roman civil law, implemented in the United States via the Ordis 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court. Stare decisis as they have in their character of sects the various Reformed churches hostile to the true religion, Romanism, no rights under the law of the nature or law of God. They're neither wrong nor deprived of liberty if the state refuses to grant them any rights at all, as we now understand why Rome could murder tens of millions of heretics and liberals without it being considered a crime in the law of those nations of which the Pope's massacres transpired. Protestantism has not and never can have any rights where Catholicity, Romanism, has triumphed now over every major city in America, and for which reason every federal judge tells us we have no constitutional rights, only government-granted privileges. Therefore, we lose the breath we expend in declaiming against bigotry and intolerance and in favor of religious liberty, or the right of any man to be of any religion as best pleases him. This is our country, as it has become duly Catholic. We have deeper interests in its public affairs than any other citizens. What then can the American, white, Anglo-Saxon, AV 1611, Bible-believing, Protestant and Baptist, male-dominant, hard-working, middle-class people expect the future of this government to be with their Congress and legislative bodies made up largely of a class of foreigners whose first and most binding oath of allegiance is to the Pope of Rome? What then is our security with James Cardinal Gibbons, 1834 to 1921, leading the Democratic Catholic hosts, with Knight of Columbus William F. Harrity, a member of the Baltimore Catholic Congress, as chairman of the Democratic National Committee, 1892, and a Catholic for its secretary? Or, as if to make assurance doubly sure, Archbishop John Ireland, 1838 to 1918, leading the Republican Catholic host with Thomas H. Carter, a devout Catholic and later a two-term U.S. Senator, as chairman of the Republican National Committee 1892 to 1896 and a Catholic as secretary, indicating that by the turn of the century Rome had indeed taken this country, controlling both the Democratic and Republican political parties. Thanks to the Orders, radical Red Republicans destroying the Jeffersonian Democratic peoples of the South. Let the reader remember the words of the New York Tablet, a Catholic paper, which says, "The Roman Catholic citizen of the United States owes no allegiance to the principles of the government which are condemned by the Church or Pope." Let him also remember the words of the Romish Bishop O'Connor, who says religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic Church. The truth of this purely Romish utterance by Bishop O'Connor has been re-echoed by the wails of 50 million martyrs, illuminated by the fires of Smithfield, groaned from the dungeons of the Inquisition, gurgled in the flowing blood of St. Bartholomew's Day, and wailed in the everlasting anguish of the damned as the echoed mockeries of the horrible death march of the Popish Inquisition mingled as shrieks in the awful uproar of hell's avenging flames. J. Scott Carr, 1900. From 1928 through the middle 1930s, Papal Knight William Randolph Hearst, the the Episcopalian Jesuit coadjutor who championed the order's causes of socialism, fascism, Irish Catholic Home Rule, the Federal Reserve System, and Nazism. Bought, syndicated, and featured in his Sunday papers essays by Benito Mussolini, the former journalist who was now the Italian premier, whose confessor was a Jesuit, and Nazi German political leaders, among them Hermann Goering, Nieder Malta, Franz von Papen, and the Jesuit-controlled Adolf Hitler. David Nassau, 2000. The Jesuits were now supreme in Washington, D.C. They had assassinated Lincoln on Good Friday with the help of their Freemasons, Andrew Johnson and Edwin Stanton, while brother Booth escaped the city with a password. They employed the finest attorneys for the defense of the arch-villain, John H. Surratt, the obedient son of Jesuit Bernardine F. Widget. Through Jesuit influence, the jury was hung, thus unable to convict Surratt, and ultimately the murderer went free. The same Jesuit machine that aided Surratt assassinated Garfield and McKinley. We read, "The aid that this young traitor received from the priests in Washington, Canada, England, and Italy was sufficient to have held them as actual conspirators, and to have brought them to justice by hanging them on the same scaffold with their dupes. Had this been done, it might have saved the assassination of the other heretical liberal presidents of this republic, Masons James A. Garfield and William McKinley." The plan of the Jesuits for their new American empire was to make it the instrument of vengeance on the European and Asian nations that had expelled them, while subordinating every country to the temporal power, earthly rule of the infallible papal Caesar in Rome. At the same time, the Jesuits would destroy the historic Protestantism of Washington's republic pursuant to the Council of Trent. And how would the Jesuits, whose inhabitants were of the white Celtic Anglo-Saxon race, enjoying the Bill of Rights, and well armed with an authorized King James Version of the Bible in one hand and a gun in the other? The Jesuits would gain control over every state government as well as the national government, and then pass legislation to further their nefarious ends. To do this, the foreign and naturalized Roman Catholic populations enjoined the communist maxim of universal suffrage, since the ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870 must be increased through immigration and then manipulated to vote en masse for the candidates whom the hierarchy endorsed. This will be done for the benefit of the Pope, his hierarchy, and his Jesuit order, not the lowly liberal Catholic priests or people. While in the process of this great scheme, they would use the U.S. Constitution to protect every piece of Roman Catholic Church property in America as a result of the treaty settling in the Spanish-American War of 1898. We read from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition. Roman Catholic Church. The juristic personality of the Roman Catholic Church, with the right to sue and to take and hold property. It was formally recognized between Spain and the papacy by Spanish laws from the beginning of the settlements in the Indies, also by a treaty with Spain in 1898, whereby its property rights was solemnly safeguarded. Concerning immigration, this is precisely what the Jesuits did. We read, "Big Catholic population gains were made between 1881 and 1890, where 1,250,000 Catholic immigrants reached American shores. In 1890, there were nearly 9 million Catholics in the United States. From 1891 to the close of the century, another 1,225,000 arrived, and the total Catholic population grew to 12,041,000. From 1901 through 1910, the number of Catholic newcomers was almost 2,320,000, and the total Catholic population leaped to 16,336,000. In a brief 2-decade period, the Roman Catholic numbers had been increased by more than 7.3 million, to the extent that now, in 2007, Roman Catholics compose over 40% of the nation's population, including 20 million Mexican alien invaders, enough to enforce the order's suspension of the Constitution and the creation of a fascist military dictatorship. Upon arriving in the Pope's Holy Roman Corporate Fascist American Empire, the Roman Catholics were used by the priests to control the elections. One of our heroes, Jeremiah Crowley, quotes the Catholic World in 1912. The Roman Catholic is to wield his vote for the purpose of securing Catholic ascendancy in this country. All legislation must be governed by the will of God, unerringly indicated by the Pope. Education must be controlled. And the utterances of the press are included by the Council of Foreign Relations, created in 1921. This means that within 30 years, from 1880 to 1910, the Catholic population had doubled, thereby enabling the Jesuits to further control the powerful political machines of both parties. Using the junior Jesuits, the Knights of Columbus, along with the Mafia and their dupes, to fleece, manipulate, and control the Roman Catholic people. The rule of Tammany Hall in New York City is but one example. In the works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, portrayed in Oliver Stone's fantastic and most accurate movie JFK, Director's Cut. Politics is power, nothing more. About this time, during the years of 1900 and 1910, the American Protestants and Baptists became alerted to this great Jesuit conspiracy and warned both Catholics and Protestants of past and present Jesuit intrigues. The Protestant minister B.C. Ogle declared in a series of Middle West meetings, "I would remind you of Webster's definition of a Jesuit, a designer and intriguer. If the Church of Rome prevailed, the Pope would be the universal king. The Jesuits are here to plot and scheme, and if possible, take from us the noble heritage of our civil and religious freedom. The rules of the Jesuit order justify theft, licentiousness, lying, false witness bearing, suicide, and the murder of parents and other relatives. The greatest crimes in history committed against individuals and nations have been committed by the Jesuits. Wherever Jesuits are, they have the torch to burn, the sword to slay, the Inquisition to torture, as in all communist and fascist nations. They are the enemies of Bible-believing Christianity. They live for conquest, fortune, and glory. To oppose the spreading of the truth about the Jesuit order and Rome's quest to destroy America's Protestant liberties, the Jesuit used Thomas Sherman, the son of that disgrace to the art of arms, General William T. Sherman, whose wife was a most devoted Roman Catholic. Thomas Sherman, the Jesuit, defined the purpose of the society with one breath and then defended it with the next, while condemning the ex-priests who were exposing Rome's true colors. We read, "It was Ignatius who conceived the daring plan of forging the weapon to beat back the Reformation. He organized an order expressly to fight and down Protestantism. He considered all outside the church as doctrinally his enemies, and so do we now. I have been for 30 years under the influence of the Jesuits, and that to condemn the order of Jesus is not only to condemn progress and thought and culture and virtue and all that is sweet and beautiful, but to condemn Jesus Christ himself, the Pope, with whom and for whom the Jesuit is crucified." These ex-priests are anarchists of the worst stamp, knowing full well his order control the international anarchist assassins network. They appeal to free speech. If free speech means the right to debauch the minds of women and children at pleasure by telling the truth about the confessional and private lives of the priests, then I, for one, say better free bullets than free speech. Priest Thomas Sherman, the Jesuit deceiver, was the contemporary of two of our heroes, ex-priests Charles Chiniquy and Jeremiah Crowley. He never faced them. Ultimately, his lies and bad conscience drove him to an attempted suicide. Confined in a Milwaukee sanatorium near the order's Marquette University, he wrote these most pitiful words to his Jesuit provincial master: "I have not the faintest gleam of any hope of works salvation. Since July the 30th, 1911, repeated confessions, but no peace. Have said the Mass the last few weeks, an agony to drag myself to the altar. No hope whatever of eternal salvation, continual effort to choke back blasphemies against God. Blind obedience has brought no amelioration. I will have no instant of peace in time as in eternity. Of this I'm most positive. Still my vows press on me, and I will continue to obey blindly the blind obedience mandated by the orders for perpetual vows. In utter despair, T. Sherman. P.S. In 1910, no general confession, afraid to face my conscience. For Sherman knew his father's role in the destruction of the Protestant South, the order's involvement in the assassinations of Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, the order's use and liberation of Jefferson Davis, and the Society's legal defense of John H. Surratt. Meanwhile, with the immigrants came the Italian Mafia, subordinate, of course, to the Jesuit order. The Mafia would first be used to oppress the Catholic populations of the large northern cities, forbidding the people to settle in Protestant communities or allowing their children to attend the Bible-reading public schools and Protestant churches. The Mafia would control crime in an organized fashion, establishing monopolies in traffic of liquor, prostitution, gambling, pornography, and drugs, further enriching the coffers of Rome. Later, in accumulating wealth and power, it will be used politically for controlling both the Republican and Democratic parties to the extreme of high-level assassination. Amazingly, the Jesuits would be so bold as to use their mafia in conjunction with the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, during World War II. We read from the Luciano Project. Not only did Lucky Luciano and his mafia associates help the Navy protect New York Harbor from espionage, sabotage, and labor strife, the influence reached across the Atlantic Ocean to the port cities of Sicily and Italy during the critical invasions of Hitler's Mediterranean frontier. The story was kept secret for 23 years with a cast of hundreds of naval officers, mafia grandees and racketeers, judges, district attorneys, corrections officers, and parole personnel, not to mention secret agents of all services working from Great Meadow Prison to the front lines of the Italian campaign. The Jesuits would also use their mafia soldiers alongside the agents of the OSS in World War II, remembering that the head of the OSS was an Irish Roman Catholic whose brother Vincent Donovan was a Dominican priest. We read, during World War II, William Donovan, chief of U.S. intelligence OSS, decided that a corps of skilled safecrackers, housebreakers, and assassins could further the war effort. Donovan secured the best mafia boss, Charles Lucky Luciano, who used his influence to protect mafia-infested American docks from Axis sabotage. In return, Luciano was granted a commutation of a long prison sentence, convicted of compulsory prostitution, and was deported to Italy in 1946. The truth seeker, the collaboration between the Mafia and the OSS is important to grasp, enabling us to understand the Mafia/CIA assassination of President Kennedy. In returning to the 1880s, the Jesuits, with the plan of making America dominantly Catholic through immigration and control of politics, needed more than the Mafia, shrine of Freemasonry, including the Royal Order of Jesters, to which the Roman Catholic actor John Wayne belonged, and Rothschild's Illuminati. They needed a new domestic order to further control the 14th Amendment, America's political power and financial might. This new order would also pretend to be the enemy of the Jesuits' old warhorse, Shriner, and 33rd degree Freemasonry, creating further agitations between unsuspecting Catholics and Protestants. Most importantly, this new order would be used to drive Protestants into the arms of the Jesuit generals, Scottish Rite Freemasonry, thereby destroying the purity of the Lord's Protestant and Baptist churches. So in 1882, 1 year after the Garfield assassination, an organization was born, having derived its name from a Spanish Jew who had been a notorious slaver and pirate. Of the Knights of Columbus we read, the Knights of Columbus founded at New Haven, Connecticut, the exact same city in which Yale University's Masonic Skull and Bones and Masonic Book and Snake secret societies are based, further evidencing a secret collusion between both Roman Catholic and Protestant orders. February 2nd, 1882, by Jesuit-controlled Reverend Michael J. McGivney, curate of St. Mary's Church, had on the 1st January 1905, during the Roosevelt administration, a total membership of 127,206 persons. They are now, 1912, said to be over 300,000 strong. An added feature to which Roman Catholics only eligible is the initiative service of 4 degrees. They work in collusion with the hierarchy and the heart and soul in politics. The fact is well known to the political machines and non-Catholic politicians, whose candidates must receive the approval of Rome and the Knights before they dare nominate them for either dog pound or presidency. The Knights of Columbus' principal business is politics, Jesuitical politics. And to what end are the Knights of Columbus and their Jesuitical politics bringing us, remembering that both President Kennedy and his killer Francis Cardinal Spellman were both members of the order? Could it be the erecting of a fascist tyranny? Is not one of the symbols used within the emblem of the Knights of Columbus a fascist, it being a bundle of rods bound together about an axe with the blade projecting? Is not that most sinister symbol like the company's Masonic swastika? Its four tips pointing in the opposite direction of the historic swastika of Bavaria's upper crust Stoll Society, the original swastika having been adopted by a Jesuit missionary to India, Robert de Nobili, in 1605, while attempting to win to the order the ruling class Brahmins. Its chief architect having been Baron Rudolf von Sabotendorf, who had been born in the order's Polish Silesia and raised by a Roman Catholic Austrian noble while in Turkey, promoting the raw, unrestrained, and centralized power of the Black Pope's Roman Papal Caesar, prominently displayed at the front of the chamber of the Senate of the Order's Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire. The end to which these oath-bound soldiers of a foreign power are working can only be the destruction of popular liberty, so condemned by the Jesuits' Council of Trent, while submitting the American Empire to the absolute temporal power of the Pope. Written in 1924, we read, "The process of destruction has gone on steadily from the assassination of the 5 presidents of the United States, Harrison, Taylor, Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, which began in 1841 and has continued at intervals, and which finds us without a semblance of a free press. After 60 years of activity by these foreign enemies within our borders, what do we find? We find subversion of free speech, a subversion of a free press. We find the denial of the right of the American people to peaceable assemblage. And by whom is this concerted plan of destruction being carried on? Principally by the priests and lay members of the Roman Catholic Church during the Wilson administration. The Army, the Navy, the Treasury, the Secret Service, the Post Office, the Emergency Fleet, transports, printing, aircraft, and dozens of others were presided over by the 4th degree Knights of Columbus. The plunders of Hog Island and the Emergency Fleet under Ian Hurley are matters of congressional record, which mounted up into the millions. Mr. Hurley is a Roman Catholic and Knight of Columbus. The aircraft scandal, under the supervision of John M. Ryan, an ardent Roman Catholic 4th degree Knight of Columbus, ran into the billions and was also subject to investigation. One of the aims of the Knights of Columbus is to restore the temporal power of the Pope. We may also add that the apostate Protestants and Freemasons FDR and J. Edgar Hoover held public offices during the administration of another notorious American traitor, an apostate Presbyterian President Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 21, who was later poisoned, having died of so-called apoplexy for a job well done. The allegiance to the spiritual and temporal powers of the Pope as sworn to by the High Knights of Columbus is sealed with an oath. That final fourth oath, creating the Knight of the 4th degree, is nearly identical with the extreme oath of induction taken by the Jesuits of the 4th vow. The oath also contains Masonic language, leading the reader to the conclusion that the Order of the Knights of Columbus is merely a type of Freemasonry for traditionalist, Tridentine Roman Catholic man. It is much like Opus Dei, utterly controlled by the Black Pope. Holding a master's degree in history from the Order's Marquette University, Jesuit temporal co-adjutant Dr. Justin Walsh believes that the oath forgery was written by a Mason. He then proceeds to document the obvious collusion between the Knights, the Roman hierarchy ruled by the Jesuits, and Freemasonry. He writes, "The election of 1912 witnessed an upsurge of American Masonically controlled nativist hostility, much of it directed against the 300,000 members of the Knights of Columbus. Knights were depicted as the vanguard for the Roman conquest of America, men who took a bogus oath actually authored by a Mason named William C. Black." Christopher Kaufman suggested one reason for the resurgence of anti-Catholicism during 1912 was the respectableness accorded Knights by governmental officials. Columbus Day, October 12th, was a holiday in 30 states due to the Knights of Columbus lobbying. In 1907, Congress established the Columbus Memorial Commission and appropriated $100,000 to construct a suitable monument. Secretaries of State Elihu Root, 1907-1909, and the back of the wicked 16th Amendment, Philander Knox, 1909 to 1913, both of whom were Masons, served in the commission along with Supreme Knights Edward L. Hearn, 1907-1909, and James A. Flaherty, 1909-1927, Freemasons and Knights of Columbus working together. The memorial, conveniently located right across from Union Station in Washington, D.C., was dedicated on June 8, 1912. Past Supreme Knight Hearn presided in the presence of President William Howard Taft, most of the cabinet, several senators, representatives, and Supreme Court justices. The rector of the Catholic University of America offered the invocation, after which President Taft, the Mason, lauded the courage of Columbus. 1,200 dignitaries attended the banquet that evening. Guests included American Pope James Cardinal Gibbons and Speaker of the House Champ Clark, Missouri Democrat and a Mason. Catholic Americanists, led by secretly anti-Americanist James Cardinal Gibbons and Archbishop John Ireland, were unflinching in their support of Masonic French republicanism, later to be overthrown by Hitler's invasion of France, and clerical liberalism, those accursed liberal priests later to be destroyed by the Nazis, SS, in accordance with the Jesuit oath. In 1920, President Wilson's Secretary of War, Newton Baker, a Mason, awarded the Distinguished Service Cross to Supreme Knight of Columbus James Flaherty in recognition and contributions to the World War I war effort, which united Protestant Masons and Catholic Knights against the common enemy, the accursed Protestant German Empire, by the order. Following the Scottish Rite, in establishing a De Molay-like youth group was not the only area where the Knights of Columbus seemed to emulate Masonry. A quasi-secret society, the order had been ambivalent toward Freemasonry from the beginning. Like the craft, it thrived on secrecy, arcane symbols, esoteric signs, passwords, and outlandish regalia. As early as 1892, German-American Catholics said the order was a pernicious secret society, and as Christopher Kaufmann points out, the suspicions were not limited to German Catholics. The ceremonial character was particularly offensive to conservative Catholics, striking them as pseudo-Masonry and Catholic garb. The question of affinity with Freemasonry came to a head after the Order's National Convention in 1919. The Supreme Council decided to commemorate the glorious deeds of the American and French armies in the recent war and voted unanimously to present a statue of the Marquis de Lafayette, the French defender of American liberty, and the Roman Catholic Freemason, to Lafayette's hometown of Metz. On August 5, 1920, Supreme Knight James Flaherty and 235 knights embarked for France. They were headed for the most pompous demonstration of Columbianism, yet accompanied by a bronze equestrian statue more than 17 feet in length and height. The statue was described by the Supreme Master of the Fourth Degree. The whole image appears to be a lifelike, living, breathing object. Lafayette's face, sharp, featured, intelligent, aristocratic. The bas-reliefs are finished in Tennessee marble, and the front of the pedestal pictures General Pershing, a Mason, at the tomb, uttering the famous words, "Lafayette, we are here." The back depicts Columbus discovering America, Englishman John Cabot being the true discoverer of the New World. One side shows Protestant President Wilson, backed by Masons Edward M. House and Bernard Baruch, delivering his war speech to Congress. The other, Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic Marshal Foch, whose genius made possible the victory over Protestant Lutheran Prussianism. Thousands welcomed the Knights on the day of the presentation, August 21st. The American ambassador opened the festivities, the statue was unveiled, and Flaherty presented Foch with a marshal's baton from Tiffany's that cost $15,000. Then Foch, a Freemason, embraced the fully costumed Supreme Knight while stammering emotionally, "I welcome you, Knights of Columbus, as the representatives of America. I know your merits because of what you have done in the war." Now let us read the complete fourth degree oath of the Knights of Columbus. We must remember that it quite possibly was written by Mason under Jesuit oversight. The oath intended to openly and publicly create a common Roman Catholic enemy for Protestants, Baptists, and low-level Freemasons, diverting all pensive attention away from the Black Pope's high-level Masonic invisible empire, then ruling the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire on behalf of James Cardinal Gibbons. Yes, dear truth seeker, the American Roman Catholic hierarchy, subject to the Sons of Loyola, used millions of their own loyal Roman Catholic people as a ruse, a diversionary scapegoat, all the while waging total and relentless war on our historic Protestant liberties, so enjoyed by Protestants and Roman Catholics alike. Via the invisible sword of the craft, we begin. I, now in the presence of Almighty God and the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Blessed Michael the Archangel, and the Blessed Saint John the Baptist, the Holy Apostles, Saint Peter and Saint Paul, and all the saints, sacred hosts of heaven, and to you, my ghostly father, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, founded by Saint Ignatius Loyola in the pontification of Paul III, and continued to the present, do by the womb of the Virgin, the matrix of God, and the rod, penis of Jesus Christ, declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ's vice-regent, and is the true and only head of the Catholic or Universal Church throughout the earth, and that by virtue of the keys of binding and loosing given His Holiness by my Savior Jesus Christ, He hath power to depose heretical kings, princes, states, commonwealths, and governments, all being illegal without His sacred confirmation, and that they may be safely destroyed. Therefore, to the utmost of my power, I shall and will defend this doctrine and His Holiness, right and custom against all usurpers of the heretical of Protestant authority, whatever especially the Lutheran Church of Germany, Holland, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and the now pretended authority of the churches of England and Scotland, of the Calvinists and branches of the same now established in Ireland and on the continent of America and elsewhere, and all adherents in regard that they may be usurped and heretical, opposing the Sacred Mother Church of Rome. I do now denounce and disown any allegiance as due to any heretical king, prince, or state named Protestant or Roman Catholic liberals, or obedient to any of their laws, magistrates, or offices. I do further declare that the doctrines of the churches of England and Scotland, of the Calvinists, Huguenots, and others of the name of Protestants or Masons to be damnable, thus intending to unite Jehovah's Protestantism with Satan's Freemasonry in violation of the Word of God, thereby destroying true Bible-based Protestantism, and they themselves to be damned who will not forsake the same. I do further declare that I will help, assist, and advise all or any of His Holiness agents in any place where I should be, in Switzerland, Germany, Holland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, England, Ireland, or America, and any other kingdom or territory I shall come to, and do my utmost to extirpate the heretical Protestant or Masonic liberal doctrines, and to destroy all their pretended powers, legal or otherwise. I do further promise and declare that notwithstanding I am dispensed with to assume any religion heretical, including Buddhism, Taoism, Shintoism, Judaism, and Islam, for the propagation of the Mother Church's interest, to keep secret and private all her agents' counsels from time to time as they entrust me, and not divulge directly or indirectly by word, writing, or circumstances whatever, but to execute all that should be proposed, given in charge, or discovered unto me by you, my ghostly father, or any of the sacred order or convent. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse or cadaver, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope and of Jesus Christ, that I will go to any part of the world, whithersoever I may be sent, to the frozen regions, north jungles of India, to the centers of civilization of Europe, or to the wild haunts of the barbarous savages of America, without murmuring or repining, and will be submissive in all things whatsoever communicated to me. I do further promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly and openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and Masons, liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate them from the face of the earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up their stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate the execrable race, that when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisonous cup, the strangulation cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed so to do by an agent of the Pope or Superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Father of the Society of Jesus, in confirmation of which I hereby dedicate my life, soul, and all corporeal powers, and with the dagger which I now receive, I will subscribe my name, written in my blood, in testimony thereof. And should I prove false or weaken in my determination, may my brethren and fellow soldiers of the militia of the Pope cut off my hands and feet and my throat from ear to ear, my belly opened and sulfur burnt therein, with all the punishment that can be inflicted upon me on the earth. And my soul shall be tortured by demons in eternal hell forever, which penalties are first found in Masonic oaths. That I will, in voting, always vote for a Knight of Columbus in preference to a Protestant, especially a Mason, and that I will leave my party to do so. That if two Catholics are on the ticket, I will satisfy myself which is the better supporter of the Mother Church. That I will place Catholic girls in Protestant families, that a weekly report may be made of the heretics. That I will provide myself with arms and ammunition, that I may be in readiness when the word is passed, or I am commanded to defend the Church, either as an individual or with the militia of the Pope. All of which I do swear by the Blessed Trinity and Blessed Sacrament, which I am now to receive, to perform, and on my part to keep this my oath. In testimony hereof, I take this most holy and blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, and witness the same further, with my name written with the point of this dagger, dipped in my own blood, and sealed in the face of this holy sacrament. As we can see from the openly anti-Masonic yet secretly Masonic Jesuit oath above, the company with its Roman hierarchy, the Order of the Knights of Columbus, owes its allegiance only to the White Pope, as he obeys the Jesuit general. The Black Pope intends to submit every human government to the earthly rule or temporal power of the White Pope, that final White Pope, risen from the dead to be the beast of Revelation 13. David S. Phelan, a priest in St. Louis, wrote in 1913, "Tell us, we are Catholics first and Americans or Englishmen afterwards. Of course we are. Tell us, in the conflict between the church and the civil government, we take the side of the church. Of course we do. Why, if the government of the United States were at war with the church, we would say tomorrow, to hell with the government of the United States. And if the church and all the governments of the world were at war, we would say to hell with all the governments of the world. Why is it that in this country where we have only 7% of the population, the Catholic Church is so much feared? She is loved by all its children and feared by everybody due to the history of the Jesuit order. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why the Pope is the ruler of the world? All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. Our benevolent Father Phelan's opinion is in complete agreement with the settled doctrines of Rome's espoused by their angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas. The Pope, by divine right, had spurged on temporal power as supreme king of the world, for the Pope of Rome, as the head of the papal government, claims absolute sovereignty and supremacy over all the governments of the earth. And in subordinating the United States to the temporal power of Rome's papal Caesar, the Jesuits fully intend to destroy Protestantism. The ex-priest and one of our heroes, Jeremiah J. Crowley, quotes the same priest, David S. Phelan. Protestantism, we would draw and quarter it. We would emplate it and hang it up for crow's meat. We would tear it with pincers and fire with molten lead and sink it in 100 fathoms of hellfire. When Jeremiah Crowley was a priest in 1902, he asked Cardinal Martinelli if the Catholics in this country numbered out 70 million and if the Protestants numbered out 10 million, what would he do to the Protestants? He replied, "Oh Christ, I'd crush him." Rome's attitude towards heretics has never changed, even as the Jesuits from the Council of Trent to the Second Vatican Council have never changed. Indeed, the great Roman battle cry is Semper Idem, always the same. It is for the reason that the great Protestant preacher Isaac Lansing declared in 1890, I do not hesitate to say that, in all candor and reason, every Roman Catholic who confesses this allegiance to the papacy ought to be disfranchised in the United States and forbidden the right to participate as a citizen in either holding an office or casting a ballot. Having doubled the Catholic population of the American Empire from 1881 to 1910, having brought the Italian Mafia into our major cities to control the Catholic populations and organized crime, and having established the Knights of Columbus to implement Jesuitical politics, the Society of Jesus, in control of the Pope and his hierarchy, had now subordinated the civil power of the American Congress to the papal power. The secret will of the Black Pope. We read in 1894, Jesuits of Washington. The Romanism of Washington is of the Jesuit type. Jesuit colleges, Jesuit clubs, Jesuit churches, Jesuits prominent in judicial, legislative, and departmental branches of the government, with Jesuit principles and methods protruding everywhere. It is more than likely that there's no other capital city in the world having so many Jesuits, and yet the number does not run up into the hundreds, for the order is not a large one in the world. The European capitals will not tolerate them. The German parliament has just said that the Jesuits must stay out. Our own government extends them to bid to strangle our national life and overthrow our hard-earned and popular institutions. Several years ago, when an important piece of legislation was before the House, which had been before the country and generally approved, the press of all selections and the religious press as well, except the Roman Catholic papers sustaining it, and which had in Congress the support of members of all parties, suddenly and unexpectedly met in vote a most disastrous defeat. How is this to be accounted for? Asked the member. His friend replied, I will show you. And taking his friend by the arm, he led him on a tour of the lobby rooms of the House and pointed out 9 Jesuit priests. Will this condition be continued indefinitely and to the great detriment of the country and the independence of national legislation? Dear truth seeker, as the Jesuits in control of Nazi Germany were behind the legislation requiring gun registration in 1935, even so, the agents in Washington are busy attempting to destroy the Second Amendment. In 2007, Senator Edward Ted Kennedy, a Knight of Columbus under the oath of the 4th degree and a trustee of the Orders Boston College in Massachusetts, is one of their key tools. By 1912, Jeremiah Crowley writes, I know and assert without fear and successful contradiction that the Vatican system, the Roman Catholic hierarchy, has a grip upon all departments of our government, from the president to department clerks, including legislative, judiciary, and executive departments, both federal and state, and the accommodating politicians, Catholic and non-Catholic, particularly the latter, are to blame for it all. The Jesuits in Crowley's day controlled Presidents Theodore Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909, William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913, and Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 1921. And being in control of the presidency, the order could rule the Supreme Court, as the president has the power of appointment. The Supreme Court, with its new evil federal question jurisdiction, could then on appeal reverse or uphold decisions of the 50 state Supreme Courts, as well as the decisions of the 10 federal circuit courts. The court's many revolutionary anti-constitutional decisions would be pursuant to Rome's plans for 14th Amendment America, which included the denial that the Bill of Rights were privileges or immunities of 14th Amendment citizenship, approving the replacement of the English common law procedure with the Roman civil law procedure in both state and federal courts, the abolition of segregation, the destruction of the public school system through the forced integration of whites and blacks, while abolishing Bible reading and prayer, the forbidding of capital punishment, the legalization of abortion, and voiding possible legislation targeted against the Jesuits, just to name a few. Of this control of the presidency, the Senate and Supreme Court, Crowley writes, in case of an adverse decision in the lower courts through the influence of Rome, the case should be appealed and, if needs be, carried to the Supreme Court of the United States, over which Chief Justice White, a Jesuitical Roman Catholic, presides by the favor of Masonic President Taft, a Skull and Bones member since 1878. Further, it was obvious to all that the nation's most powerful Freemason, President William Taft, was intimate with the hierarchy in America and sent his personal aide, Mayor Archibald Butt, who thanks to the Jesuits went down on the Titanic, made of substandard steel, to confer with the Pope in Rome. Taft was also the bosom friend of Federal General Sherman's son, the Jesuit Thomas Sherman. Additionally, an English Jesuit and foremost advisor to King George V, the Rasputin of England, Father Bernard Vaughan, converted Taft's sister to Romanism, and it was President Theodore Rex Roosevelt with his Maltese Cross Ranch in the Badlands of North Dakota who branded American Protestants as bigots over their concern of Rome's ascending power in Washington, tied to the Pope's American lords of finance and industry, including shipping tycoon William R. Grace, whose grandson Nada Malta J. Peter Grace Jr. would serve as Cardinal Spellman's chief agent in the 1963 murder of President Kennedy, and J.P. Morgan. He also began the continuing centralization of power in the presidency. One of his acts was the creation of the Bureau of Investigation. From the time of Theodore Roosevelt's accession to the presidency, American presidents of the 20th century had begun to assert unprecedented claims to centralize power in the executive office. As part of this new federalism, President Roosevelt's Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, by executive order, had created the Bureau of Investigation in 1908 as a full-time investigative division of the Justice Department, America's holy office of the Inquisition, and by which order and to what end is the control of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the federal government. Crowley tells us, Rome's Jesuitical emissaries, agents, and missionaries are everywhere. They have no conscience but the Pope's dictation. They are allowed to assume whatever dress they please for their better disguise, any occupations in church or state. They are in the highest and lowest conditions and have been known to appear as active and zealous members in non-Catholic associations and churches, sometimes filling prominent Protestant pulpits. Their object is to engender strife, to influence party spirit, hated by George Washington, to produce faction, to counsel rebellion, to plot and plan assassinations. Understanding both the control and plans of the Jesuit order in Washington is imperative if we are to understand the Kennedy assassination. For the Jesuits produced their Chief Justice Earl Warren to cover up the assassination with his Warren Commission, as well as defend Nada Malta Clay L. Shaw during his trial in New Orleans, initiated by Jim Garrison. The Jesuits used President Lyndon B. Johnson to appoint the Warren Commission, and with the Justice Department used J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI to suppress evidence of a conspiracy. The Jesuits, with their Irish Catholic agents in Congress, such as the late Thomas Tip O'Neill, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, did all they could to thwart the proceedings of the Assassinations Committee in 1976, which concluded there was a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy thanks to Robert Groden, the author of High Treason. The words of our hero Charles Chiniquy were now fulfilled. Jeremiah Crowley, America's Martin Luther of the 20th century, proved without refutation Rome's control of both federal and state governments, but the warnings went unheeded. The Protestants, with their Jesuit-infested federal council of churches, did nothing. The liberty-loving Americans, Protestants, Baptists, Jews, and liberal Catholics, for the most part, had forgotten they were truly in a holy war initiated by those ever-present warlords, the Sons of Loyola. Priest Isaac Hecker was right. Rome, controlled by the Jesuits, took the American government away from the American people in the early 1900s and have kept it. Since that time, the Jesuits have used the military and financial might of their Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire as the sword of the Church to subordinate the nations of the world to the temporal power of the cannibalistic, transubstantiating papal Caesar. May God help us to repent that he may forgive us. Of the year 1913, we ask in retrospect, what would the Jesuits do now that they were in control of every president from Theodore Roosevelt to Woodrow Wilson? They would further develop the American Empire patterned after their reductions in Paraguay. In preparing for the Second 30 Years' War, 1914 to 1945, they will create a national inquisitional police force and implement two pillars of the Communist Manifesto. In 1908, the very year Rome declared the American Empire no longer to be a missionary country, it was now conquered, they founded the Bureau of Investigation, later renamed the FBI. In 1913, they created a privately owned national bank called the Federal Reserve System, established a heavy progressive income tax with the 16th Amendment, and created the Pope's Internal Revenue Service to collect it. Rome would now have a police state with its corporate monopolies while destroying the white Protestant middle class. Rome's seeds of absolutist Jesuit corporate fascism had been successfully planted and would come in a full bloom during the Black Pope's 21st century Anglo-American-led crusade against Islam. All we Americans need now is another one of the Order's terrorist events, suspension of the Constitution and resultant martial law. Then we shall finally have our American Joseph Stalin. In 1917, the Jesuits, contrary to Washington's farewell address, brought 14th Amendment America out of isolation to be used like the nations of the Holy Alliance to intervene in the affairs of foreign countries by military invasion and restoring and maintaining the Pope's temporal power. This would be the true purpose of the American Empire during World War I. President Woodrow Wilson, the apostate Presbyterian Protestant and self-confessed traitor, would be used to punish the Protestant German Empire and then greatly curtail Jewish immigration in preparation for the Order's Eurasian Jewish Holocaust. For Kaiser Wilhelm I and Prince Otto von Bismarck's government of the Protestant Second Reich had banished the Jesuits in 1872 and in 1907 threatened to immediately expel every Catholic priest from the empire in retaliation for Pope Pius IX's infallible decree, Netemiri. That decree, simply put, declared that any Catholic not married by a Roman Catholic priest was living in adultery and that children were bastards. Humiliated, the Pope modified the decree so as to not apply to Germany. The Jesuits in Crowley's day controlled Presidents Theodore Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909, William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913, and Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 1921. And being in control of the presidency, the Order could rule the Supreme Court as the president has the power of appointment. The Supreme Court, with its new evil federal question jurisdiction, could then on appeal reverse or uphold decisions of the 50 state Supreme Courts, as well as the decisions of the 10 federal circuit courts. The court's many revolutionary anti-constitutional decisions would be pursuant to Rome's plans for 14th Amendment America, which included the denial that the Bill of Rights were privileges or immunities of 14th Amendment citizenship, approving the replacement of the English common law procedure with the Roman civil law procedure in both state and federal courts, the abolition of segregation, the destruction of the public school system through the forced integration of whites and blacks, while abolishing Bible reading and prayer, the forbidding of capital punishment, the legalization of abortion, and voiding possible legislation targeted against the Jesuits, just to name a few. Of this control of the presidency, the Senate and Supreme Court, Crowley writes, in case of an adverse decision in the lower courts through the influence of Rome, the case should be appealed and, if needs be, carried to the Supreme Court of the United States, over which Chief Justice White, a Jesuitical Roman Catholic, presides by the favor of Masonic President Taft, a Skull and Bones member since 1878. Further, it was obvious to all that the nation's most powerful Freemason, President William Taft, was intimate with the hierarchy in America and sent his personal aide, Mayor Archibald Butt, who thanks to the Jesuits went down on the Titanic, made of substandard steel, to confer with the Pope in Rome. Taft was also the bosom friend of Federal General Sherman's son, the Jesuit Thomas Sherman. Additionally, an English Jesuit and foremost advisor to King George V, the Rasputin of England, Father Bernard Vaughan, converted Taft's sister to Romanism, and it was President Theodore Rex Roosevelt, with his Maltese Cross Ranch in the Badlands of North Dakota, who branded American Protestants as bigots over their concern of Rome's ascending power in Washington, tied to the Pope's American lords of finance and industry, including shipping tycoon William R. Grace, whose grandson, Knight of Malta J. Peter Grace Jr., would serve as Cardinal Spellman's chief agent in the 1963 murder of President Kennedy, and J.P. Morgan. He also began the continuing centralization of power in the presidency. One of his acts was the creation of the Bureau of Investigation. From the time of Theodore Roosevelt's accession to the presidency, American presidents of the 20th century had begun to assert unprecedented claims to centralize power in the executive office. As part of this new federalism, President Roosevelt's Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, by executive order, had created the Bureau of Investigation in 1908 as a full-time investigative division of the Justice Department, America's holy office of the Inquisition, and by which order and to what end is the control of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the federal government. Crowley tells us, Rome's Jesuitical emissaries, agents, and missionaries are everywhere. They have no conscience but the Pope's dictation. They are allowed to assume whatever dress they please, for their better disguise any occupations in church or state. They are in the highest and lowest conditions, and have been known to appear as active and zealous members in non-Catholic associations and churches, sometimes filling prominent Protestant pulpits. Their object is to engender strife, to influence party spirit, hated by George Washington, to produce faction, to counsel rebellion, to plot and plan assassinations. Understanding both the control and plans of the Jesuit order in Washington is imperative if we are to understand the Kennedy assassination. For the Jesuits produced their Chief Justice Earl Warren to cover up the assassination with his Warren Commission, as well as defend Knight of Malta Clay L. Shaw during his trial in New Orleans, initiated by Jim Garrison. The Jesuits used President Lyndon B. Johnson to appoint the Warren Commission, and with the Justice Department used J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI to suppress evidence of a conspiracy. The Jesuits, with their Irish Catholic agents in Congress, such as the late Thomas Tip O'Neill, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, did all they could to thwart the proceedings of the Assassinations Committee in 1976, which concluded there was a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy thanks to Robert Groden, the author of High Treason. The words of our hero Charles Chiniquy were now fulfilled. Jeremiah Crowley, America's Martin Luther of the 20th century, proved without refutation Rome's control of both federal and state governments, but the warnings went unheeded. The Protestants, with their Jesuit-infested federal council of churches, did nothing. The liberty-loving Americans, Protestants, Baptists, Jews, and liberal Catholics, for the most part, had forgotten they were truly in a holy war initiated by those ever-present warlords, the Sons of Loyola. Priest Isaac Hecker was right. Rome, controlled by the Jesuits, took the American government away from the American people in the early 1900s and have kept it. Since that time, the Jesuits have used the military and financial might of their Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire as the sword of the Church to subordinate the nations of the world to the temporal power of the cannibalistic, transubstantiating papal Caesar. May God help us to repent that he may forgive us. Of the year 1913, we ask in retrospect, what would the Jesuits do now that they were in control of every president from Theodore Roosevelt to Woodrow Wilson? They would further develop the American Empire patterned after their reductions in Paraguay. In preparing for the Second 30 Years' War, 1914 to 1945, they will create a national inquisitional police force and implement two pillars of the Communist Manifesto. In 1908, the very year Rome declared the American Empire no longer to be a missionary country, it was now conquered, they founded the Bureau of Investigation, later renamed the FBI. In 1913, they created a privately owned national bank called the Federal Reserve System, established a heavy progressive income tax with the 16th Amendment, and created the Pope's Internal Revenue Service to collect it. Rome would now have a police state with its corporate monopolies while destroying the white Protestant middle class. Rome's seeds of absolutist Jesuit corporate fascism had been successfully planted and would come in a full bloom during the Black Pope's 21st century Anglo-American-led crusade against Islam. All we Americans need now is another one of the order's terrorist events, suspension of the Constitution and resultant martial law. Then we shall finally have our American Joseph Stalin. In 1917, the Jesuits, contrary to Washington's farewell address, bought 14th Amendment America out of isolation to be used like the nations of the Holy Alliance to intervene in the affairs of foreign countries by military invasion and restoring and maintaining the Pope's temporal power. This would be the true purpose of the American Empire during World War I. President Woodrow Wilson, the apostate Presbyterian Protestant and self-confessed traitor, would be used to punish the Protestant German Empire and then greatly curtail Jewish immigration in preparation for the order's Eurasian Jewish Holocaust. For Kaiser Wilhelm I and Prince Otto von Bismarck's government of the Protestant Second Reich had banished the Jesuits in 1872 and in 1907 threatened to immediately expel every Catholic priest from the empire in retaliation for Pope Pius IX's infallible decree, Netemiri. That decree, simply put, declared that any Catholic not married by a Roman Catholic priest was living in adultery and that children were bastards. Humiliated, the Pope modified the decree so as to not apply to Germany. President Wilson would also be the tool in commencing Rome's vengeance on Orthodox Russia. In aiding the Bolshevik Revolution, he would be used to punish Russia's Romanov dynasty and Orthodox Church. The Jesuits' new Russian Empire, called the USSR, would be greatly expanded under the orders Grand Inquisitor Joseph Stalin, for in 1866 Tsar Alexander II, who maintained religious toleration for all creeds professed in his dominions, abolished Russia's 1847 Concordat with Rome's high priest and king the Papal Caesar, who practices cannibalism due to Bible-rejecting, Baal-worshipping doctrine of transubstantiation, drinking the blood, eating the flesh of his false, dead, and unbiblical Christ, still hanging on the cross of his occultic crucifix. And the leaders of the Orthodox Church had refused to attend the Vatican Council of 1870. In 1880, Dostoevsky's prophetic words warned of the power of the Jesuits in Russia. Again, we repeat his war cry. Those are the worst of the Catholics, the Inquisitors, the Jesuits. They're simply the Romish army for the earthly sovereignty of the world and the future with the Pontiff of Rome for emperor. That's their ideal, but there's no sort of mystery or lofty melancholy about it. It's simple lust of power, of filthy earthly gain, of domination, something like a universal serfdom, with them as masters. That's all they stand for. They don't even believe in God, perhaps. Jesuits sue for the favor of the great and powerful. To obtain this, they decry faith in God, join in attacks on Rome, play the atheist or the infidel as they would in the Bolshevik Revolution. The Jesuits were further enraged with the response of Tsar Nicholas II, who was influenced by the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, to the Pope's decree. Nizamiri of 1907, like Germany, Russia utterly condemned it. Crowley writes, "Why do not the rulers and governments of all non-Catholic countries step in to protect the right of the people from such a dangerous and infamous invasion by the Pope of Rome, as did the government of Russia, which recently prosecuted Bishop Casimir Oskayowitz, suffragan bishop to the Archbishop of Warsaw," noting that SS General Heinrich Himmler's guide, who stood godfather to the Reichsfuhrer, was also the Archbishop of Bamberg, and Father Ciplinski, on the charge of declaring illegal marriage null and thus infringing civil authority. The result was a sentence of 16 months imprisonment for both priest and bishop. The term is to be passed in a fortress, and the bishop is to be deposed from his diocese. Russia knows Rome, and therefore nips her in the bud in order to prevent her gaining supremacy over civil authority. Jeremiah J. Crowley then asked this very penetrating question: why do not the governments of the British Empire and the United States prosecute and punish according to law priests and prelates guilty of similar and far worse crimes? The answer, Brother Crowley, is that in 1912, like today in 2007, the Jesuits controlled both Protestant empires, 14th Amendment America, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain. The Jesuits in turn used these two Protestant empires to punish Rome's two greatest enemies, the Protestant German Empire and the Orthodox Russian Empire, beginning with the Great War, World War I, that would begin the orders 20th century genocide in the Eurasian white races. The Great War, begun in 1914, would commence the punishment of both Germany and Russia for 30 years. The populations of both countries, especially Protestant East Germany, would suffer terribly under the Jesuit Inquisition of Russian communism during the Cold War. Heavily promoted by CIA Knights of Malta, Henry R. Lucy of Time magazine, and William F. Buckley Jr. National Review, that Cold War properly understood to be Rome's old Inquisition, killing heretics, liberals, and infidels on both sides, while conducted by the Jesuit generals' international intelligence community, supposedly ended in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, and the fall of the USSR. Time will tell if the company's Cold War truly ended, or if Russia is still our undying foe, despite the illusion that President George W. Bush and President Vladimir Putin are temporary allies in fighting the Black Pope's war on terrorism. Meanwhile, the shots that rang out at Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, 4 days after Pope Pius IX had entered into concordat with Serbia, to the astonishment of the Orthodox Serbian people, would begin the Jesuits' second 30 Years' War, and a deceived American and British populace, Protestant and Catholic alike, would unite to fight the war to end all wars against the Lutheran Hun, making the world safe for papal socialist communist democracy over there. Freemason Jose P. Rizal, 1861 to 1896. With the order's expulsion from Spain in 1868, the Black Pope began to set in motion the breaking up of the Spanish Empire via his invisible empire of international Freemasonry. At about this time, Rizal, the George Washington of the Philippines, began his education at the hands of the Jesuits and later the Dominicans. In 1882, he departed from Europe, where he furthered his medical studies, ultimately to become fluent in 10 languages, writing Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. While in Jesuit-ruled Madrid, he became a Freemason, imbibing the doctrines of Voltaire. The order is Jesuit-trained Masonic French revolutionists. Rizal having been fully intended by the company to be its tool in breaking his nation away from Spanish rule, it only to be betrayed at the peace conference, denied its independence, and annexed as a territory into the order's 14th Amendment American Empire. But Rizal, now a Bible-believing Protestant, had attacked Romanism and was a true nationalist. He exposed the Franciscan, Augustinian, and Dominican priests, proclaiming it was Rome that held his nation in spiritual thraldom as well as political and economic paralysis. Two fatal errors brought the secret wrath of the order upon the first Filipino. Rizal demanded a replacement of Spanish priests with native Filipino priests, and he demanded the Protestant rights of freedom of speech, press, and conscience for his people. Against the advice of his highly educated parents, Rizal returned to the Philippines in 1892, but our brave patriot was a condemned man. Arrested and exiled, he spent 4 years in research while founding a school and hospital. After Rizal had been deported to Spain in 1896, the order ignited a revolution using its Katipunan, surnamed the KKK, a Masonic secret society. Rizal was returned to Manila and blamed for instigating the revolution, a physical impossibility. Condemned to be shot, he was attended by Jesuit priests, Pistolts, and Balaguer, seeking a recantation of his heretic faith and liberal views. Refusing, Jose Rizal faced a firing squad. With calm in the presence of Pope Leo XIII's attending Jesuits, our heroes, Vatican assassins. Jesuit priest Thomas Ewing Sherman, 1856 to 1933, General Sherman's son. Jesuit Thomas Sherman was the son of that disgrace of the military art of arms, Federal General William Sherman, who under the advisement of Jesuit Pierre de Smet and with the blessing of Thaddeus Stevens embarked on his murderous crusade through the American South, destroying the white Protestant civilizations of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, pursuant to the wicked counsel of Trent. Jesuit Sherman was a close personal friend of the order's Masonic American President Theodore Rex Roosevelt, serving as a chaplain in the Spanish-American War, ignited by Masonic J.P. Morgan, 1898, and while at a dinner in honor of the Shermans, 1906, was invited by Roosevelt to accompany a unit of U.S. cavalry to reenact General Sherman's raping and thieving march to the sea. An outraged Protestant Georgia forced the president to withdraw Jesuit Sherman's military escort, thus ending his near journey of infamy. Sherman became one of the order's most influential Jesuit of the Black Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire, hating two of our heroes, Charles Chiniquy and Jeremiah Crowley, who dared to expose the designs of the Papal Caesar's Society of Jesus against the Calvinist Republic of our beloved George Washington. Sherman died in 1933 and was buried in the old Jesuit cemetery at St. Charles College in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, along with another brother, Jesuit John Slater, 1877 to 1933, and Slaughter was the grandnephew of Freemason Alexander Stevens, the vice president of the Southern Confederacy. The Masonic craft leads to Rome. Jesuit spiritual coadjutor F.R. Michael J. McGivney, 1852 to 1890, founder of the Americans Hierarchy Right Wing and Americanist Order of the Knights of Columbus, organizing foreign RC immigrants subject to the first American Pope James Cardinal Gibbons. Seals of the Order of the Knights of Columbus. The meaning of the symbols employed by the order in composing its seals are striking and are as follows, left to right. First is the general seal of the order using a Roman fasces for a counterpiece. The Jesuits' favorite form of rule is fascism. Next, the seal of the fourth degree. The oath is both Jesuitical and Masonic. And lastly, the seal for a third rank and council officer known as Chancellor. His emblem is the Isabella Cross at the fourth degree, the same Isabella who in 1492 not only commissioned Columbus but also expelled the Jews from Spain. The skull and bones is a Masonic symbol of death used by the Nazi SS. The Chancellor's robe is black with portions of white trimmed in silver fringe like the robes of the German Teutonic Knights and Himmler's Jesuit-styled SS. Jesuit with pistol that shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand, 2004. Franz Ferdinand, for opposing the Black Pope's pan-German movement, was terminated and given last rites by Jesuit Anton Pannegan, who in turn was given the weapon by a friend of the Archduke. The order had begun its World War I. Count Leopold von Berchtold, 1914, Jesuit temporal coadjutor, Austrian foreign minister. Upon the successful assassination of the Archduke, the company then used its Austrian foreign minister to ignite the crisis into World War I. The vengeance for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Berchtold, not Kaiser Wilhelm II, is the villain in causing the Great War, along with the Uncle of Europe, King Edward VII, and his participation in the 1892 Russian imperial conspiracy. Catholic and Jewish immigration, Ellis Island, New York City, 1900. The company controlling U.S. immigration policy, the steamship lines, and the ports Romanized on northern cities, destroying New England Protestantism. New York City would serve as Rome's political and financial power base over the empire, the Archbishop also ruling the Mafia and the Jews of B'nai B'rith. Nation of immigrants, John F. Kennedy. Tenement slums, Lower East Side, New York City. Care nothing for poverty-stricken Catholic immigrants, the order used them to control elections within northern cities and to justify the implementation of socialist policies such as Masonic FDR's New Deal. Meanwhile, the company's Masonic cartel capitalists paid these people a pittance for their sweatshop labor. But the gospel of Christ reached his elect, these displaced peoples and races. Freemasonic Southern White Ku Klux Klan rally, 1920s, betrayed and defeated during the Order's Civil War, and now threatened with massive Roman Catholic immigration. Freemasonic Southern Whites created the new KKK at Stone Mountain, Georgia, uniting angered Protestants and Baptists against Catholics, niggers, and Jews, ignorantly bringing fascism to America. Mafioso and Italian Roman Catholic Charles Lucky Luciano, 1936. This brazen beast of a wicked man was convicted of compulsory prostitution and sentenced from 30 to 50 years in New York's Clinton State Prison, the Siberia of all American penitentiaries. From Great Meadow Prison, he was pardoned and deported in 1946 through the power of Archbishop Francis Cardinal Spellman. The funeral of Charles Lucky Luciano, 1962. Luciano's elaborate funeral in Naples, Italy in 62 included a hearse carved in silver and black SS colors and drawn by 8 black horses. The Italian alien, aided by his financial Jew boy and faithful subordinate Meyer Lansky, and ruling America's waterfronts via the Teamsters, orchestrated his mafia with FDR's Office of Naval Intelligence in securing a safe landing during the Allied invasion of Sicily. In truth, his partnership made billions for the Vatican through the Pope's inquisitous black market. The Mafia /ONI/CIA/FBI alliance would later assassinate President Kennedy as ordered by Francis Cardinal Spellman, who in turn always had a blessing of the papal Caesar in Rome. Naval Captain Roscoe C. McFall, 1943, Irish Papal Knight McFall, 3rd Naval District Intelligence Officer, bore the overall responsibility for the Luciano Project dubbed Operation Underworld. Great Meadow Prison, New York, 1940s. Moved from Clinton Prison to Great Meadow Prison, 1942. FDR's Office of Naval Intelligence, as well as Army Intelligence and the Office of Strategic Services, worked with Luciano's Sicilian International Crime Syndicate. During World War II, this same network would be perfected during the Pope's Cold War and thus assassinate JFK for attempting to break its power. 2 naval officers complicit in Kennedy's murder were Rear Admiral Edward C. Kenney, Surgeon General of the Navy, and Rear Admiral George G. Berkeley, JFK's physician, who in 1985 told author Henry Hurt that JFK's death was due to a conspiracy. The Luciano Project, Rodney Campbell, New York. McGraw-Hill Books, CO, 1977.